So apparently Codex Space Marines isn't being replaced, but the supplements are, and there looks to be some major shake-ups for the chapters power-wise. Let's dive down the Space Marine Rumours rabbit hole once more, and talk about their upcoming releases. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're continuing to talk Space Marines, in this short series of videos talking over some new models, units and books for the faction. In the last two we've talked over Rabute Gilliman's rumoured new rules, and two fun sounding new units for the Codex, in some missile armoured Primaris troops and a Brutalis Dreadnought for some close combat Redemptor goodness. Now let's talk about Space Marine rulebooks and when they're going to be coming out, and how they might impact players of the faction. So this video is the third part in a leak originating from the Eldari Advent Calendar leakers. These came out from some of Games Workshop's playtesters last year, and they were rather industrial in their leaky of the new rules, deciding to spread out all of the rules teasers for the Eldari Codex over the whole month, and the vast majority of it was at least fairly accurate, based on some older playtest rules. Supposedly it's one of the sources from that same leak coming out with some new stuff, though at this point, until we actually get any confirmation, it is very much in the realm of rumours, not in confirmed fact, so if you're not bothered about hearing stuff, feel free not to watch. I feel like they're at least interesting though. I wouldn't be too surprised if they do reflect something like what we'll be getting, but it's definitely not impossible that these could turn out to be made up. In any case, from this set of rumours, the headlines are these: Space Marines are supposedly going to be the next major release after World Eaters, sometime within 9th edition, not at the start of 10th, but it isn't going to be the entire Codex makeover that some people were perhaps expecting, including myself. According to this source, it sounds like the original Codex isn't going to be replaced at this time. It's going to be just the updated supplements for the various different Codex chapters, things like White Scars, Ultramarines, and the other ones that don't have a 9th edition book for them yet, typically the ones that are a bit more Codex compliant compared with the Divergent ones that got their supplements earlier in the edition. As we mentioned in the last one, the two new units, the Brutalis Dreadnought and the Desolators, will be available together in a box set before you can get them separately. That does seem to be Games Workshop's way these days. And there'll be a few new Space Marine characters materialising over the next few months as well, with a new Azrael Sculpt and Dante miniatures coming alongside the Arcs of Omen Vastor book. I guess that would tally very well with the supposed picture of Azrael that we saw in leafing through the Vastor book. Let's go through each of these and talk about them a little bit more. There are a few more details as to the individual codexes. So first up, Space Marines coming after World Eaters is what was rumoured previously. Another Space Marine release wave of some sort has been rumoured for quite a long time, and I feel like most people, myself included, were probably expecting a new Space Marine Codex, as it typically seems to be with their pattern to release more than one an edition. We had two Space Marine Codexes in 8th. They do tend to release them just a little bit more regularly than the others because they know that that's perhaps their biggest market, so it is more in their interest to keep them refreshed more regularly. From actual Games Workshop, we really don't have many details as to what comes next after World Eaters. So far it appears that they've probably shown off the entirety of the release for World Eaters, they've shown their Codex and the 8-bound and things, and there weren't any other units listed on that leaked points cost page. Beyond that, I think the only thing that we know for certain for 40k is the Arcs of Omen series. The first one's about Abaddon and has some nice rules for playing 40k but indoors without vehicles and things, plus some campaign missions and lore, and then there's going to be another 3 books in that series following that. They said that they're largely going to be issuing match play rules in those books, so probably no formations or things for other armies, but it does kind of make me wonder what they're actually going to put in them, if not that. Can't say that rules-wise it sounds super exciting if it's just more layered rules for this supplement that they're developing. I'd guess the Vastor one would probably have Vastor himself in. Not sure what the Angron one would, as presumably his rules are going to be in the main codex. In any case, I feel like it could be a little while before Games Workshop gives us too much of a teaser as to what comes next. They often reveal something big on Christmas Day, so maybe that might be the next big one. It does sound like World Eaters are potentially a fair way off yet still, and until their models and books actually start to drop, we might not get a whole ton more details as to the next step. As for the World Eaters release, it's going to be sometime within winter. I probably wouldn't expect it too early in January, as we already have the Guard models to be released, and with quite a few kits it might be a bit of a staggered one over a week or two. If I'd had to make a bit of a guess on that, it'd probably be somewhere around early to mid-February, so I guess if we are seeing a rejuvenated bunch of Space Marine supplements, perhaps sometimes within the month of March seems plausible. Otherwise, I did find it kind of interesting news, but probably a positive that the original Codex might well not be replaced. As mentioned, Games Workshop does like to sell Space Marine Codexes and regenerate them often to keep their most popular faction with current rules. and I guess they know that they've got a whole bunch of people who are near guaranteed to buy it if they do refresh their most popular army. I know Space Marines are really quite underwhelming in rules at the moment, at least for the most part, but I honestly don't feel that a new codex is 100% necessary for making them good again. They could easily give the faction a massive power boost in points cost if they wanted to, just cut the points cost by 10% on most of the codex, and you're almost guaranteed to propel them from kind of rubbish to very good. I feel like releasing a full codex this late in the edition might be a little bit disingenuous as well. 40k books are kind of infamous for having a bit of a short shelf life, but if 10th edition is happening sometime in 2023, then it means that a new Space Marine book could be exceptionally so. I guess as another alternative, they could perhaps do a 2nd edition version of a book, maybe the equivalent of the Chaos Space Marine book that they did for 8th. They issued a 2nd edition of the Codex when they added a bunch of new units in. Largely rules wise, it was kind of similar, but it just had the new units and a few extra rule sections. That feels like it wouldn't be the most terrible thing. If you were starting the faction, then you'd have all the rules in one place, and maybe just give the option of a digital download for people who already have the codex and aren't keen to buy more expensive paper. In any case, if all of this is completely accurate, then it will put the main rules focus on both the new units and also the Space Marine chapter books. If they do update them all individually and not in some sort of compendium or something, then we'll be looking at replacement books for the Ultramarines, White Scars, Imperial Fists, Raven Guards, Salamanders, and Iron Hands. Currently, I'd say that their rulebooks do work pretty well with the core Space Marine Codex. I feel like when Games Workshop did their 8th edition release, they did quite well in having different Marine armies that were at least somewhat balanced and pulled you in different ways to build an army. There may be a few of them are perhaps showing their age in 9th edition a bit. Certainly Raven Guard and particularly Imperial Fists are really having a tough time. Imperial Fists perhaps particularly not liking that a lot of artillery got nerfed going into 9th, plus a lot of Space Marine damage platforms with bolters just not being quite as good as other stuff. There are just a few vague hints and details as to what's going to be coming in the Codex. Apparently most of the chapter-specific units are remaining at least reasonably similar, just with small improvements or stat tweaks to make them fit a bit more in 9th edition. The leaker also had a few rough takes on power levels as well. Their main impression was that Imperial Fists have got a lot better. They've got a lot of raw power, supposedly with heavy intercessors being quite interesting for them somehow. Not sure how that would work, to be honest. Maybe they've got specific stratagems that work with them. I guess they're not a terrible, durable bolter platform at the best of times, I guess. Otherwise, supposedly Raven Guard are marked as an army that really hasn't improved enough to make them good, apparently quite underwhelming still. And Iron Hands and Ultramarines are generally fairly similar to before. I feel like particularly Iron Hands are kind of working okay at the moment, perhaps arguably one of the strongest way to play core Codex Space Marines compared with the other more divergent chapters. Overall, I do find it really quite likely that they will be reissuing these books in 9th edition at some stage. They are now the only books with an 8th edition rule set that hasn't been updated to 9th, and it maybe would be a little bit weird if you designed an entire edition of 40k and just went out to replace almost all of the books, but then for some reason just leave a few left over. With the current state of Marines, I do feel that these books would probably go hand in hand with a power boost from the chapter approved points costs. They should be out in January. It could be an interesting time for Marines if Games Workshop does actually manage to do something meaningful for them. They've repeatedly said in those Meta Watch videos that there's going to be a lot more coming in January, and they accept that the secondary change was pretty underwhelming. Otherwise, as we talked about, there's a couple of new units apparently, with a new box set. The new units are Primaris Desolators, Intercessor-style Space Marines armed with missile launchers, perhaps being a Primaris type equivalent of Devastators with fancy missiles like in this Rumour engine. There's then a Brutalis Dreadnought, which is apparently a similar one to a Redemptor, but a bit more fitted for close combat, maybe seeming a little bit similar to the Blood Angels Furioso-style Dreadnought. According to the leakers, there's at least some chance that the newer Gravis Captain might also appear in the box set, but seeing as he's already had an individual release, it's not exactly guaranteed. For these new units releases, I feel like it maybe could fit the time frame to be a Christmas Day release. Games Workshop have given us some interesting stuff the past couple of ones, with Versus box sets being previewed. Speaking of that, coming directly after World Eaters, again it could fit very well with a joint box set with them and some Space Marines as the antagonists. If they did want to try and do a similar sort of style box to that Eldritch Omens one that they had last year, then again that could fit with something like a February release, I suppose. I feel like a unit of missile guys, a dreadnought, and a character would seem at least fairly reasonable for one half of a Versus kit, particularly if they're all new units. Otherwise, with 10th edition on the way, it does seem that there might well be more Marines on the way there. I feel like this release isn't exactly a huge one as Space Marine standards go, so I would probably expect more to be dropping then. Maybe that could be when we get the jump pack Primaris that were also rumoured before, or maybe something like Primaris Terminators, That's also something that's on a lot of people's wish list, though I'm a little bit less certain as to whether or not that would happen. Finally, for this one, they also mentioned Azrael and Dante. Models for these two apparently dropping sometime around the Vashtor book for Arcs of Omen. I do wonder whether or not that's partly confirmed by that Vashtor book preview that we had of Azrael, who might well be fighting him in that very blurry picture. Again, this one seems entirely reasonable to me in the run up to 10th edition. Going from 8th to 9th edition, they really did focus on character releases, maybe things that were just small additions to armies as opposed to entire armies in their own right, perhaps almost deliberately trying to encourage people not to go out and immediately buy a huge amount of armies just before they change all the rules on them. As choices go for models to get the Primaris treatment, they seem like they're pretty much as high up there as you can get. Both chapter masters with really quite old miniatures and thoroughly iconic in the lore. I must admit, if they'd chosen any one Primaris Dark Angel to redo, I probably wouldn't have picked Lazarus first myself, but maybe they were kind of deliberately going for a slightly more minor character before they got into the big boys. Dante would be very, very cool as well. Would really like to see what they do with him. He's Lord Commander of the Imperium Nihilus after all, so he's a pretty important character in current 40k lore. I think they've often said that he's a bit on the old side to be reliably surviving the Primaris treatment though, so I guess we'll wait and see. Anyway, there we have it, a whole collection of Space Marine rumours as to the release. I know all this is just a little bit speculative and not very confirmed yet, but I did find it really quite an interesting rumour. A lot of it makes a lot of sense. Only time will tell whether or not it turns out to be accurate, I suppose. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to check out the previous two. I've talked about Rabute Gilliman's rules and the new units in a little bit more detail, including a few of their weapon profiles. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that links down in the video description below if you'd like to help keep these videos coming. Making all the news content like this does take a fair bit of time and effort, particularly staying up into the early hours of the morning recording this video. If you would like to help support at all, then channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.